This is Yair Davidi speaking to you from Jerusalem, the capital of Israel. We are now about to discuss a rabbinical source concerning Joseph. Joseph was the son of Jacob. Jacob was otherwise known as Israel. Jacob had 12 sons. These 12 sons became the forefathers of the 12 tribes of Israel. One of these sons was named Joseph. Joseph begat two sons named Ephraim and Manasseh. From the descendants of Joseph emerged a predominant element amongst the English-speaking peoples. The lost 10 tribes in general, that is to say that section of the Israelite nation that was lost. There were 12 tribes of Israel. As we said, there were 12 tribes of Israel. 12 tribes of Israel went down to Egypt. In Egypt they were subjected. Under Moses they were brought out of Egypt, and in the wilderness they received the Torah. Then they entered and conquered the land of Canaan and divided it up amongst them. And this henceforth was the land of Israel. The land of Israel, according to the Bible, stretches from the Nile to the Euphrates. And it includes the Isle of Cyprus. It includes southeast Turkey. It includes Syria and Lebanon, and parts of Iraq, and parts of Saudi Arabia, and the Gulf states, and Jordan, and part of Egypt, and all of the territory now illegally occupied by the Palestinians in Gaza and elsewhere. And God willing, all of this land will be liberated and will be settled by Israelites in the near future. All events, and we are now discussing Joseph. Joseph was the forefather of Ephraim and Manasseh. And Joseph gave rise to these two tribes, Ephraim and Manasseh. And from Ephraim came Jeroboam. Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, led 10 of the 12 tribes in revolt. They revolted. Similar to the American Revolution. The Americans declared their independence from Britain. So too did the 10 tribes, or the 10 northern tribes of Israel, declare their independence from Jerusalem, from Judah. They separated and they created their own kingdom. Their own kingdom was known as the Kingdom of Israel. And read about it in the book of Kings. The Kingdom of Israel was independent from the Kingdom of Judah. Judah was comprised of the tribes of Judah and Benjamin, along later with most of the tribe of Levi. The Cohens and Levites are from the tribe of Levi, and also with a minority representation of all the other tribes, since members of the other tribes who felt more sympathetic towards the religious practices of Judah went to the south. And also when the northern kingdom was attacked by the Syrians, there were refugees from the north who made their ways to the south. At all events, these were, they had for a few hundred years, they had a separate kingdom of Israel in the north, comprised of 10 tribes. And this kingdom was conquered by the Assyrians, and all of its inhabitants were taken into exile. And they lost consciousness of their identity. They became known as the lost 10 tribes of Israel. And through a series of permutations of political changes, of being subjected, and then claiming that by other peoples, then claiming their independence, and moving around, these peoples, the 10 tribes of Israel, in their places of exile, asserted their independence, moved to the north, moved into southern Russia, and then moved to the west. Apart from another section of them that moved via the sea, moved to Spain, and then through Spain into the British Isles, and what is now known as France, and also to Scandinavia. In other words, there were several pathways of migration, but they all ultimately converged on the same areas of Western Europe, and that is where we find their descendants today. These descendants are now to be found amongst Western nations, and from these Western nations emerged the USA, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Canada, and the USA, and other nations. And they all of these peoples are dominated by elements from the lost 10 tribes, especially from Joseph. Joseph dominates the English-speaking peoples. Joseph is also found amongst the amongst the European Israelites, but the European Israelites, the nations of Finland, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Holland, Belgium, Switzerland, France, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, England, they are all where places where the lost 10 tribes are to be found. But amongst the other nations are to be found peoples from the other tribes of Israel, from Reuben, from Issachar, from Zebulun, from Naphtali, from Dan, and so on. The tribes of Joseph, Ephraim and Manasseh dominated the English-speaking countries, the British countries, and their offshoots overseas. And now we had a role to play. This division and this dichotomy in the Israelite entity was for a reason. There was a purpose behind it. The divine providence had a reason for this division. And the division was to bring about a reform of the world, a reform of the world's nations. And ultimately the two sections, Judah and Joseph, that means the Jewish people, and the Joseph who heads the 10 tribes, they will reunite. They will once again become one nation. And we find this almost expressly, or expressly said in the Bible, in the Hebrew Bible. And we understand the Hebrew Bible through studying it in its language, in the language it was written in, and also through its simple meaning, and as well as that we look at the different commentaries. So one of the commentaries we came across is that of Sefat Emet, or Sefat Emet. Depends how you pronounce it. Sefat Emet was written by one of the early rabbis of Gur. Gur is a Hasidic movement. Hasidim is a section of amongst the Jewish Orthodox Jews. Originally it began as a kind of revolution, a protest movement you could say, or a popular movement to make Judaism or belief in God and keeping the law and the commandments and so on, to make it more popular, to give it more of an emotional emphasis to the whole thing, to be more egalitarian, and it evolved. It achieved a lot, and today it still exists. Today a lot of the Hasidim are look to outsiders. They seem to be very dressed very strictly. They live in little ghettos or little sections of their own, and they keep to themselves, and they seem to be a closed group, which is true to some degree. They try and keep themselves as isolated or as insulated as possible from the pernicious influences of the modern world, but it's not exactly that way. A good proportion of them are actually newcomers, people who've come in, identified with them, and become part of them. They accept others, and they have a solution for certain people. They have a solution for a lot of people, but not necessarily for everyone. But they have a way to keep the truth, a way to keep the law, a way to believe and to keep close to God, and it works for them. And they have something to say, and we read it, and we read some of their writings, and read the writings of their rabbis, because we find a lot of insights in this. And also, I am Yair Davidi, head of, more or less, director of the Britain Hebrew Nations movements. Hebrew Nations movement that identifies the lost 10 tribes with Western-speaking peoples. I also read some of their commentaries when I can. And I've come across important points that to give a shed light upon the lost 10 tribes and their role in the world today. And we use it. We use these insights, and we write about them. So one of the insights, as we said, is that from the Sefat Emet, and we are going to tell you a few things, a few points that we came across. I should point out that we came across these points through more or less casual reading. We weren't really looking for anything, and we don't read that much of these commentaries. We're not experts in this area. We only we read bits and pieces here and there when we can, when we feel like it. And despite that, we came across important points. So this is just one. This Rabbi Sefat Emet is just one. Rabbi Yehuda Ari Leib Alta, 1847-1905, lived in Poland. Is just one out of hundreds. Even though he's very prominent, there were a lot of others. hundreds. There were a great many others, and there still are, who are just as prominent as he is, almost as prominent as he is, and on his level, and they all wrote books and commentaries, and someone who went, and also in these other works, here and then, we also find insights. So I'm just saying that if someone in the future should go into this and looking at this from the point of view of the Lost Tribes, finding information concerning Lost Tribes, and we dedicated himself to do so from an academic full-time point of view, so a lot of important information will doubtless become available. But this is what we have at the moment. We just have this, what we managed to pick up almost by chance. The divine providence and showed us this, and we're going to share these insights with you. And so the Sefat Emet, he says concerning Joseph, he said Joseph was a revealer of secrets. Joseph was called Sefunot Paneah. Sefunot means hidden things. Paneah means to reveal, to open up. So Joseph was a solver of the hidden matters. Joseph could penetrate the essence of a matter. Also shows that Joseph had something secret about him. Joseph had an insight. Joseph had the ability to understand things at an instinctive level. And English-speaking peoples do have this ability. They have had this ability. They often have managed to understand things that others have not done, and they have helped to influence the world in a great way, in a great and on the whole beneficial manner. It was concerning Joseph, it was said in Genesis 49:2-6, it says that the blessing shall be on the head of Joseph and on the crown of the head of him that was separate from his brethren. And the expression him that was separate in Hebrew is Nazir. Nazir also reminds us of the Nazirite. The Nazirite in Numbers 6:12 was a person who took a vow upon himself not to shave his head and to abstain from wine and intoxicating drinks. And he was called a Nazirite. Nazirite, someone who abstained, cut himself off. He kept himself separate, and so too Joseph kept himself separate. The Anglo-Saxon nations have kept themselves separate from the rest of the world. Now speaking of Joseph is to cleave to the Almighty even while occupied with matters of this world. Joseph is traditionally referred to as the righteous one, keeper of the covenant, because he did not succumb to sexual temptation. When Joseph was sold as a slave, he was taken into the house of an important potentate, and in this house the wife of the ruler of the house of the estate tried to seduce him. She sexually molested him, and he ran out of the house, and then he was falsely accused of rape, of attempted rape, and this led to a whole series of events that eventually led him to him being made the second in command over the kingdom of Egypt, which at that time was the strongest and most powerful nation in the world. But Joseph had kept himself back. He did not give in to sexual temptation or to the sexual advances of others. And he kept himself righteous. He kept the covenant, as if to say. And so too the tribes, the sons of Joseph, should do the same. They should keep the covenant and look for the truth, and self-annulment to the truth leads to glory. And we want to see Joseph reveal himself. We want the identity of Joseph to become known to others and to be openly acknowledged. We want everyone to know about it. We want this truth to be made known, and we work towards making this truth available and to making others, or allowing others to participate of the insights and of the knowledge that we have obtained through our research and our readings. Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav, who is another Hasidic rabbi, he said that someone who endeavors to tell the truth will recognize the truth when he comes across it. He will when others are deceiving him or saying things that are wrong. He will also recognize the truth when he hears it in others, and they who tell the truth and endeavor to tell the truth, to know the truth, to recognize the truth, they will be believed by others. They will have credibility. So this is a tool worth cultivating. Knowing the truth, learning the truth, recognizing the truth, and saying the truth. The name Joseph means increase, to add on to. And so this also says something about the personality. Joseph, someone who descends from Joseph, should gather together all of his forces, everything he has, and dedicate himself to the service of the Almighty. And this is what Joseph should do. Judah and Joseph represent truth and faith. By way of these qualities, a person may perfect himself, even in times of darkness, with faith in the almightiest providence of everything. Joseph was chosen to be the leader by heaven, but the tribes were not so easy with this. They did not accept it. Therefore they sold him, they were jealous of him. And in the future, a resolution of this conflict, of this source of tension will be made. It will be made when Joseph and Judah reunite. The other tribes will also find their place. And all of the tribes, through the unification of Judah and Joseph, will be able to give expression to their inner identity and to their tribal self-expression and self-realization. The source of redemption is an aspect of Joseph, which is the unification of individuals in the generality. We need to identify with the tribes, with our tribes. We need to identify with Israel, our forefather. And there were 70 clans when Joseph became the head of the kingdom of Egypt. He caused his father and his brothers to come down to Egypt, and they're listed in the book of Numbers. The families who come down to Egypt, and each one of these family members become the head of a clan, and altogether there are 70. So we had 70 Israelite clans. As said in Genesis 46, verses 9 to 25. And they came down to Egypt. They came down to Egypt through Joseph, and they began to realize their destiny as Israelites through the agency of Joseph. The patriarchs, the forefathers of the Israelite nation, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Jacob is also known as Israel. The father of Joseph represent the soul, the inner essence, the prototypical elements that we all derive from. Whereas the 70 descendants of these patriarchs represent their expression in history. And the expression of the Israelites in history comes about through the agency of Joseph. And these, historically, according to the Bible, these 70 heads of clans went to Egypt, and Egypt was an impure country. But they managed to retain their separateness, their peculiarity, and they did that through the virtue of Joseph having resisted sexual temptation. And we can do the same, and we can save ourselves and save the world and save the Israelite destiny. Jacob represents all of Israel and the Hebrew soul or essence, whereas Joseph is the expression of the Hebrew element in history in action. Judah, on the other hand, has a different task, is a different aspect. Judah, the very name Judah means own up to, acknowledge. Judah represents acknowledgement, recognizing the truth. And through this truth, through acknowledging and recognizing the truth, the world has a chance and a means to correct itself. Judah represents, in a sense, work, what must be done. The endeavor to understand the Torah, to learn and elucidate what the Torah, what the Hebrew Bible says, and what in the light of oral tradition and different principles of exegesis, of commentary and of understanding. Judah in this sense represents the workday. Joseph represents Shabbat, the day of rest, the sense of completion. When all this is, if to say, put aside, and other matters such as ruling the world and directing the nations of the world come into play. In the future, Judah and Joseph will reunite, as we find in Ezekiel 37, and the tensions that exist between Judah and Joseph will be put aside. As it says in Isaiah 11 verse 13, the envy also of Ephraim shall depart, and the adversaries of Judah shall be cut off. Ephraim shall not envy Judah, and Judah shall not vex Ephraim. There will no longer be tension between the two. And Joseph, as if to say, brings to fruition, he brings to expression the patriarchs Abraham, Isaac and Jacob. They represent the written Torah, the Torah as it is given. Judah, on the other hand, represents the oral law. He represents the working out of the law, its practical application, its elucidation. And so, in a sense, the written law is the 40, the strong point of Joseph, whereas the oral law is that of Judah. In the future, the two elements will be united. And this is when the physical descendants of Judah and Joseph are reunited in one kingdom, so too will the two aspects of their being, of their existence, of what they work for, also be reconciled and brought together with each other. We remember the incident when Joseph was sold by his brothers into Egypt, and then in Egypt he was worked as a slave, and he was falsely accused of attempted rape, and he was put in jail. In jail he interpreted correctly the dreams of two important ministers of Pharaoh, the ruler of Egypt, and as a result of that he became an advisor to Pharaoh, and he became the effective ruler of the country of Egypt, the most powerful country in the world in that time. And he saved Egypt and all of the known world from famine. And his brothers came down to buy grain, because also in the land of Canaan there was famine. They came down to buy grain from Egypt, and they brought to Joseph, and they did not recognize Joseph, but Joseph recognized them. And eventually Joseph brought it about that they should be reconciled. But before then he played around with them. He made them bring down Benjamin, his brother. When Benjamin was there, he framed Benjamin to make him look as if Benjamin wanted to steal the chalice, the cup, the special cup he had. And he wanted to put him away, and he made himself out as if he was going to keep him as a prisoner, as a servant, as a punishment for this theft. So Judah approached Joseph, and he began to remonstrate with him and argue with him, and he said, "Be Adoni." He said, "Please, sir, or my master, let me speak unto you." As it says, this is translated, "O my Lord, let thy servant pray, I pray you, speak unto you." And then he begins to speak to Joseph, and in the end Joseph cannot take the tension. Judah offers to put himself, to have himself substituted for Benjamin, and then Joseph reveals himself to his brothers, and they are reconciled, and then Joseph helps them, and he brings them down into Egypt, and he establishes them in the land of Goshen. But in this expression, when Judah approached Joseph and said, let your servants, I pray, speak to you, he uses the Hebrew expression, "Be Adoni." This is translated as "I pray, please." But it can also, in Hebrew, have different words, different names. Expressions can have more than one meaning. So "be" also means "in me." And Adoni means my master, or it means lordship, or can be understood to mean lordship. And so the Sefat Emet says that in effect, Judah was telling Joseph that "be in me" is your lordship, is the power that you have is through me. And Judah was not necessarily consciously saying that, but this is what he said, and everything in the Bible is said for a purpose, is said for a purpose and expresses a purpose. This is what, in effect, the message that was being given over as an extra meaning, in the statement that had manifold implications, as does everything written in the Bible. So he was telling Joseph that through him, through Judah, has Joseph power. Can Joseph do what he is doing, and is Joseph empowered to do what he is doing? And from that, Sefat Emet brings an important principle that through Judah, Joseph is enabled to fulfill his task. Through Judah doing what he has to do, Joseph is also unable to fulfill his task, and vice versa. And the two halves of the Israelite peoples have different tasks to play. Judah in this age, in our time, has a task of learning the Torah, understanding the Torah, teaching the Torah, practicing the Torah, and settling and establishing the land of Israel. Joseph has the task of ruling over the nations, directing the nations, and elevating the nations. And the ability of Joseph to properly do what he has to do is, in a mystical, spiritual level, dependent to some degree on Judah doing what he has to do. And vice versa. Judah doing what he has to do helps and is dependent upon Joseph doing his chore. The two are interlinked in a subconscious manner, and in future they will reunite and they will become one nation, and the two aspects of existence of the two different tasks will be reunified in one body, in one Israelite entity. Sefat Emet compares Joseph to Benjamin. Benjamin was with Judah. Benjamin was one of the tribes of Judah. Judah and Benjamin together were the core elements of the Jewish nation. It could be that amongst the Hasidic group there is a predominant input from the tribe of Benjamin. So the Sefat Emet said concerning Benjamin, on the breastplate, Benjamin had a task, a jasper stone of many colours. And jasper, yeshpa in Hebrew, may be understood, or Sefat Emet explains it to mean I have a pay. That's what it can be understood to say, or the letters can maybe so read. In other words, I have a mouth but I don't use it. Benjamin had the quality of discretion. And similarly the temple was built on that part of Jerusalem that belonged to Benjamin. So too the tabernacle in Shiloh, even though it was built in the territory of Ephraim, it was on a strip of land that extended into Benjamin. Somehow it was also part of Benjamin. So this is the quality of discretion. It means that it more keeps to himself, but others can share in it, but they have to come to it. It's not so open. And this is how the law is given in our day. Joseph, on the other hand, is open. Joseph is open. He's open to everyone, and that is his task. His task is to rule the world and to govern the world and to elevate all the nations of the world. So they have two different aspects of conduct, and both of them have a role to play. Both of them have reasons behind them. And in the end times, the two aspects once again will reunite. Will all become one. And the values and the inputs of all the different sections of Israel will be united. Similarly, we had the breastplate. The high priest wore a breastplate. On the breastplate was a precious stone. Each stone was allocated 12 stones, each stone for one of the tribes. The stone of Joseph was the Shoham stone. Shoham stone is also known as, or we understand to be onyx, a kind of black precious stone. And that was the stone of Joseph. Also, on the breastplate was attached to the shoulders for shoulder clasps. Shoulder clasps on the shoulders. And on each clasp there was also a Shoham stone, and on the stone was written the names of all the 12 tribes. And this stone happened to be the Shoham stone, which was also the particular stone of Joseph. And Sefat Emet says that it's come to tell us that by the means of Joseph, all the 12 tribes are united at their roots. Joseph, as if to say, carries the other tribes. Joseph gives expression to the other tribes. May enables the other tribes. So these inputs are what we found in the commentary Sefat Emet, and you can look up the article on our website for more sources and particular sources for anything that we have said. Another point which was worth noting is a descendant and the successor of the Sefat Emet, someone who Rabbi Israel Alta in 1895 and 1977, who also headed the Gura Hasidim at a later time. So he also had insights that we have used and that we found of value. So one of his insights in his book Beit Israel is that the children of Israel, especially as associated with Joseph, were also known as Gomer and as Gomerites. That's what he says. And what exactly he meant is something else, is something for discussion. It's not that clear. But the fact is, he said it. That's what he says. And we find in the book of Hosea, chapters 1 and 2, with the 10 tribes, not Judah, but the 10 tribes of Israel are referred to as the children of Gomer. Gomer was a loose woman representing the mother of the 10 tribes in their places of exile. And they were known as Gomer and as Gomeri, or Gomerites. And this is a name that was given to the Cimmerian Confederation in the Syrian times, and we have shown, not only we have shown, but others, it has been noticed for some time, that the 10 tribes in their places of exile linked up with the Cimmerians, were identified with the Cimmerians. The Cimmerians were a powerful nation on the outskirts, and also the Cimmerians were a powerful nation. They existed within the Assyrian Empire. They were first subjects of the Assyrians. The Israelites, northern Israelites, are identified with the Cimmerians, so may be equated with the Cimmerians, or at the very least considered as part of the confederation with along with other peoples that the Cimmerians formed. The Cimmerians are referred to in Assyrian inscriptions as Gemiri or Gamira, and they're known in secular sources as Gomer or Gomeri, the same name that the Beit Israel says that the Israelites were known as, and the Bible also indicates that the Israelites were known as, and we have shown through archaeological evidence that the Israelites were part of this confederation, because the Israelites became part of the confederacy of the Cimmerians, and they moved north with them, they moved to the west, they gave rise to Western peoples, they gave rise to Western civilizations. The Scythians and the Gothics and the related peoples emerged from the Cimmerian federation, and so this justifies why we may equate the Cimmerians with the lost 10 tribes. They're also known as Gomer or Gomeri, and Gomer, as we said, was a name given in the book of Hosea, chapters 1 and 2, to the 10 tribes in their places of exile. And these identifications are therefore confirmed by the Beit Israel in his comment.